This video will showcase a very simple localization workflow, which is led from the development perspective. Here you can see a phrase strings project in which we've got some locales defined. English is our default locale, or in other words, the language of our source content, and we're localizing into German and French. At this point in time, we don't have any keys in this project, but we're going to be ingesting them from a GitHub repository. What you can see on the screen here is a button for GitHub sync, which will allow us to pull keys from any supported resources files in your GitHub repository directly into phrase strings, and once the translations are complete, they can be exported as a pull request to your GitHub repository. To set up the connection with your GitHub repository to a particular phrase strings project, you would navigate to More, go to your project settings, down to GitHub sync, and here you would enter your personal access token for your GitHub repository. After that is done, you'll be able to navigate between all the repositories that you have in your GitHub account, and also specify which branch the push and pull action should be performed. You'll notice here that we can also enable auto import from GitHub, which means that if any new keys are added to the resources files or any new resources files are added to your GitHub repository, the keys will be automatically imported into phrase strings. Now you'll also notice that you've got this message here which says your configuration seems valid. This is referring to a configuration file which is needed, this .phrase.yaml file, in which you define some push and pull syntax in terms of what you expect to push and get out of phrase strings in terms of file formats and the name of the file. And of course you would need to reference the API key for that particular project in phrase strings. And in terms of the content that we want to pull in, it's in a simple JSON format here, where we've got some key IDs and values which require translation. So now what I'm going to do is just import the content directly from the GitHub repository. This process is pretty seamless. If I click on refresh, you can see now that we've ingested 14 keys from that JSON file in my GitHub repository. And if we now navigate into the editor, you'll be able to see the list of keys that we've ingested from the GitHub repository, along with the content that requires translation. We can then proceed to perform the translation for German and French. You can open content in a multilingual view, but before you effect or put into process the translation workflow, you can actually perform some additional key management tasks. For example, adding screenshots to the keys to provide some visual context for your translators. Now, for this case, I'm going to be showing you how this can be achieved with Figma. Here you can see a Figma design which contains exactly the same values that we pulled in from the JSON file from our GitHub repository. And you'll notice here that I've labeled the text layers of this Figma design exactly as the key names which are coming from the JSON file, so from development. Now, what I want to do is make use of the plugin that we've developed for Figma, which I can then just run. As you can see now, it's pulling up a list of all the content that we want to push, along with the key names into phrase strings. And if I click on continue and select my project, you see here that I've got the ability to upload screenshots to the project. When I click push, it will now recognize that exactly the same key names are in my phrase strings project, and it gives me the option to either create copies or connect with the existing keys. And this is the option I want to choose in this case. I'll click on accept and proceed. And now that that's done, we can now navigate back to the editor just to show you exactly what's happened. So here you can see now that beside each key, we now have a screenshot associated with it, which is a great benefit for translators working in the tool. They do not need to leave the environment to see exactly which part of the text relates to which part of the screenshot. And for each key, then the screenshot is visible for them directly in the translation editor, and the relevant text in the screenshot is also highlighted for them. So this provides a great benefit for linguists working in phrase strings. Now what we'll do, just to wrap up the process, is we'll run a pre-translate action. Of course, you would generally have linguists working in the system who would go through the process of translating, making use of translation memory or machine translation wherever there isn't content in the translation memory. In this case, I'm just going to do a quick pre-translate action. And now that that's done, we can see, right, that we've got now translations for all for the couple of locales which we want to translate into. And now that that's all gone through a linguist process, the final part of the process now is if we navigate back to our folder, our project view, and we can now use the GitHub sync to export these keys and the translated values to our GitHub repository as a pull request. And if we now navigate to pull requests, you can see that there's a merge request coming now from phrase strings. And so we'll just confirm the merge. And what we'll now be able to see is that we have our localized French and German files with the translations that we've performed in phrase strings.